We all know the story of Jonah, right? Jonah gets called to Nineveh by God to preach to the people about their wrongdoings, but instead Jonah decides to hop on a boat and go in the complete opposite direction from the city that he's been called to.
Oh.
Then, while on the boat, a massive storm takes place, and the sailors end up throwing Jonah into the water to get the sea to stop. Jonah gets swallowed by a whale, but eventually the whale spits Jonah out, and Jonah is back on dry land, and he finally decides to go to Nineveh.
Phew.
I know that many times that I've heard this story, I've thought to myself, I can't even imagine being in the situation that Jonah was in and feeling like, oh my goodness, I have done the wrong thing, I've ended up in the wrong place, I've disobeyed God, and now what if I get punished? What if something terrible happens? And that can bring a lot of anxiety to us when we think about it in that way. So there's actually a part of this book that I was reading the other day, and it really stood out to me about God's goodness in this whole situation and about how God was glorified even through Jonah's disobedience. And so I'd like to share that with you. In Jonah chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "All the sailors were afraid of the storm, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship." By this we know that the sailors were not worshippers of our God, but they were worshippers of multiple gods and idols, and they were making sacrifices and in their desperation to many different gods. Then later on, when Jonah finally told them that he was the one responsible for the storm and that he was to be thrown into the ocean, Jonah told them who his God was. In verse 9, when he says, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." This terrified them, and they asked him, "What have you done?" After this, when Jonah was thrown into the ocean by these sailors, the sea completely calmed down and the storm ceased. Then it says in verse 15, "Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him." Yes, it wasn't right of Jonah to run away from God, but that did not stop God from making sure that he got the glory. All those sailors on the ship who were just a few paragraphs earlier, they were worshipping other gods and calling out to other gods. All of those sailors feared the Lord, and they ended up making vows and making a commitment to our God, even through Jonah's mistake. That is just so encouraging to me personally, and I hope to you as well, that even when we make a wrong move, even when we disobey God and all of that, God will still find a way to take control and to bring himself the glory and make something good out of a bad situation. In chapter 2, Jonah starts calling out to God, and he says things to God like, "I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me, the deep surrounded me, seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down, the earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit." And God freed him from the whale's stomach, or the big fish stomach, as some people say. I'd like to encourage you today with this story that no matter what you do, no matter what mistakes you've made or are making right now, God has the ability to completely change your situation. And when you turn back to God, life becomes beautiful again. You're not stuck in the darkness and in the waves and in not being able to breathe and covered in seaweed. You're able to be spit out onto the shore and to see the sunlight again and to continue and have a second chance at doing what God's asked you to do, for he's a gracious God. And so I just pray for you right now. I just pray in Jesus' name that whatever situation you're in, that you would be blessed and that you would turn to God, and that God would take all of the weight off of you, that you wouldn't put expectation on yourself to be perfect, but that you would know that even when you make a mistake, God will always work it out for his glory, and there will always be a light at the end of the tunnel.